Hey, y'all. Welcome to the Convos with Anita Santiago podcast. I am your host, Anita Santiago. Like, subscribe, share, and review the podcast on all the major platforms. And as always, if you need to contact me directly, you can reach me at convoscws@gmail.com. Just a little quick housekeeping note. I know the publishing schedule has been a little dicey here and there. Many of you know I'm in the last stages of a very rigorous doctorate program. So I'm working my way through that. So I appreciate everyone who hangs in there with me. I plan to continue to bring you great content, and I hope that you will keep coming back for more. So, what are we talking about today? Well, with all of this focus on relationships, we've all heard Megan Thee Stallion and the guy she was with. There's been a lot of talk online and different things like that. And as a therapist, I started thinking about, how toxic relationships can shape our lens and have an impact on us. So I kind of want to talk about toxic relationships, kind of identifying the harmful dynamics that we find in our lives sometimes and what we can do about it. So, we're going to explore moving beyond like the typical narrative that we see on social media, toxic romantic relationship, and we're going to go into some other areas as well and help look for red flags and understand the psychological toll that these relationships can take, and at the end hopefully have some challenges for you so that you can start dealing with the toxic relationships in your life. So with that being said, let's jump on into it. Toxic family relationships, this is a big one. I read an article the other day that said many people statistically have cut off one or more relationships with family members. I think that in this society that focuses on the individual, um, sometimes people don't feel loved, appreciated, respected, or just treated well, and they take that drastic step of having to cut off family members. So, what are toxic family relationships? How do you get into those? How do they start? Well, in thinking about this, and you think about the back and forth, the ups and downs that you go through with different people in your family, that can occur because of the loyalty trap. What is the loyalty trap? The loyalty trap says blood is thicker than water. We have to stick together because we're family and those kind of things. And that can keep you engaging in toxicity way beyond the point that's reasonable. You may feel pressured to tolerate bad behavior from aunts, uncles, and cousins um, because of that. Sometimes with our aunts and uncles or the elders, aunties and unks, you know, sometimes they can be toxic in the sense that they may weaponize their seniority in dealing with you. Well, what does that look like? It can look like being overly critical, maybe intrusive, wanting to know all your business, uh, sharing things told in confidence to other members of the family. That can be very, very, very toxic. And sometimes in that, you know, seniority type of perspective, sometimes people feel like that it's their duty to do those things, which makes it even worse. Sometimes you might have cousins uh, that that you don't get along with well, or there's rivalries or competitions and comparisons, and sometimes those start in childhood, and they can be promoted by the family, right? And then those things may carry over into adulthood, where now you have uh, cousins maybe one-upping each other or trying to outdo each other, and not really building the bonds and relationships of closeness and communication and those sorts of things. So the burden of this is that you can have dynamics like at the family reunion or the holiday gatherings where the toxicity is on full display. And I bet if you think back in your memory banks about the time where you were at the family reunion and this, that, or a third happened, um, that might be related to the toxic nature of the relationship between one or more individuals. So I think when it comes to family toxic relationships, that can have a really negative impact on a person, because as children, your first important relationships are typically with family members, aunts, uncles, and cousins. So if there's toxicity here, then that could be problematic. Toxic relationships between parents and their children can be very, very devastating. And that's because of the emotional investment or the emotional connection that parents and children have. So when it comes to that relationship, toxicity can look like entitlement, manipulation, emotional blackmail, where um, the child or the parent can put pressure on the relationship. So if it's the child, it can look like the child saying, well, if you love me, you would buy me that gaming system. If you cared for me, you would get me a car. When it comes to the parents, it could be, if you honored your mother and father, you would follow my directions without question, or you would not uh, act up because you know I'm doing the best that I can for the family. So this dynamic can really cause a lot of stress and strain in the relationships. Now, in the case of blended families, if there are blended families where you have children and parents from multiple families blended together into one family, then the toxicity can emerge as different groups within the family system start to position themselves for power and control. That creates a lot of friction between the family members, and again, it leads to more toxicity. And the big takeaway from the toxic nature of relationships with parents and children is that it's very, very stressful and often leads to a lot of resentment. Okay, so when we talk about toxic relationships in the workplace, this is something that many of us are probably more familiar with and maybe have more experience with. We rely on our jobs to provide the funds that we need to live, and we try to go to work and do the best job that we can. And we spend a lot of time with the people on our jobs. If you work 8-hour shifts or 12-hour shifts, you are spending a lot of time with your coworkers, maybe more time than with your family members. So, what does toxicity in the workplace look like? And more importantly, how does it impact you? Well, toxicity in the workplace can look like competition, stealing credit for someone's work, cliquish behavior. We all know about the cliques, the work husbands and work wives, and um, the toxic supervisors that micromanage. Toxic relationships can come in a variety of styles, in the workplace. And often the result of the toxicity is a feeling of frustration or being trapped or being under the gun and never feeling like what you do is enough. Toxic environments lead to burnout. You can have physical health problems as the stress increases, and just flat out not being happy or satisfied in your work. Many people leave uh, environments because of toxicity, and unfortunately some organizational cultures don't really address toxic relationships. So those people that are being toxic are often allowed to run amok, as I call it. And that the person who's trying to get it addressed can often feel like no one's listening. So just think about that. Start to think about the toxic relationships you have in your family, maybe with your children and your coworkers. How many toxic relationships do you have in your daily life? And more importantly, um, can you identify them? Now, when we talk about toxic relationships, we really mostly think about the romantic side, right? I've got a toxic girlfriend or boyfriend or ex. And this is what we see on social media and in the news, the focus of cheating and red flags and um, love bombing and gaslighting and those kind of things. Romantic relationships that contain a lot of toxic behaviors can be very damaging because you look at that other person as your source of comfort or safety or support or all of that. So if that is the case and you start to feel or sense the toxicity, that could be devastating because this isn't the person it's supposed to be coming from. So toxicity in romantic relationships can look like manipulation, narcissism, um, be, grinding down of your self-esteem or your confidence, love bombing, and all of those kind of things. And toxicity in romantic relationships can cause you to lose your sense of identity. You're stunned and confused and don't know why this is happening. You may isolate from friends and family because you're not really sure what's going on. So you don't really know how to talk about it or explain it. That it can be very, very troublesome. And in some extreme cases, toxicity in romantic relationships can lead to trauma symptoms, especially if there's intimate partner violence, domestic violence, or any of those things occurring. So, again, step back and think between your family, your job, and other types of relationships you've had. How many of them have been toxic? Do you see patterns with the toxicity? Do you see that many of your romantic relationships were toxic and contained a specific form of toxicity? Do you find that many of your coworker relationships are toxic and they are full of gaslighting or competition or other types of things? So that's really important to be able to identify the toxic relationships in your life. Okay, so now you know you've got some toxic, you've experienced toxic relationships, or you may be in a toxic relationship. What do you do now? Well, you got to take inventory of what's toxic and why, and start to think about how to change it. Um, Boundaries, clear boundaries, clearly communicating what behavior is appropriate or not appropriate and what the consequence is. Hey, you can't curse at me because if you do, I'll end the conversation right then and there. Having boundaries so that others know what to expect when they engage you. That's a real good way to deal with toxicity. Um, Start looking at who leaves you drained, who makes you anxious after you interact with them. Is this really toxicity or is this burnout? That's really important to know. Seek some external support, therapy, plug in for the therapists out there, therapy support groups, friends, someone that you can talk to and get some objective feedback about what is happening and maybe get some feedback on your ideas on how to deal with it. And the most important step is to embrace necessary endings. Accepting that you cannot fix a person, especially a toxic person, um, is an important step. Sometimes when it comes to toxicity, the only real solution is no contact. or low contact. Okay, I don't talk to you as much. A no contact is pretty extreme, but depending on the nature of the toxic relationship, it may be what's necessary, because at the end of the day, you have to preserve your peace and your mental health and your sense of well-being. And if you're not experiencing those things, then you have to take some type of action to deal with those toxic relationships. How do you feel about this topic? Do you feel that you have toxic relationships? Do you feel it's a relevant topic for today? I think it is, in light of our what's going on in the world with people and politics and dynamics. It seems like we're surrounded by toxicity. So I think the topic is very timely. I'd like to know what you think about it. So here's your challenge. Do an inventory of your relationships and start dealing with the ones that are toxic. Increase your well-being, increase your peace, and decrease the levels of toxicity in your life. Thank you for stopping by. I appreciate you hanging in there with me here at the Convos with Anita Santiago podcast. I appreciate each and every listener, fan, and supporter. Please like, share, subscribe, and review the podcast on all the platforms. You can reach out to me directly at convoscws@gmail.com. Until the next time, happy listening.